Howdy, everybody. Humanities 2, Shasta College, fall semester. Hope you get your Halloween costumes planned. I will be going as a disgruntled filmmaker. You think anybody will notice? I'll notice. Anyway, it is October 22nd. I put the wrong date on this. Damn it. Now I got to go change it. And we're going to continue with 19th century writers. I know what you're thinking. 19th century is so long ago. But, that's our history, and it's not that long ago, folks. 21st century, which were probably most of you were born 20th century, and then before that, the 19th century. And you think, well, what was going on back then? Well, a lot. I've covered some of it. The industrial age was happening. Electricity is happening. The printing press. The transatlantic railroad is coming. It's already being built. Once we tie the two things together, travel in America becomes possible. It used to take months to travel across the country in a stagecoach or horseback or walk, whatever. If you're Lewis and Clark, you walked it. So things are changing, and people are reading like never before because the printing press and more people know how to read, not just the upper classes, but because of education, more people are learning how to read and write than ever before. And so there's a need and a desire to read, but there has to be product. So writers have to put out the product. And they had a captive audience because we didn't have MP3 players. We didn't have YouTube to waste our lives away watching. We didn't have films. And so what do? We read. That became the new passion for a lot of people. It helped them escape their lives. I teach a film class, and I ask people, why do you go to movies? Well, now, and I get the same answers all the time. They entertain me. They take away my boredom. They take me out of my place and time and put me in another place. They let me see worlds that I never saw before. Well, guess what, folks? That's what novels do too. And we're going to talk about novelists today. Remember what I told you the other day? It's fiction writers. Fiction is the truth. It's a made-up story, but they're talking about the human condition and human relationships, and so it's very much the truth. And the writers I'm going to talk about today, just a couple. I'm going to give you some documentaries to look. I already posted most of them, I think, on Canvas. You'll see them. Plus, I'll make an announcement. One of them is, two of them are women, which is highly and rare deal for the times. And one of them is very much a man, Anton Chekhov, and he is a Russian. And he's mostly famous for his plays. They're still being performed to this day. Uncle Vanya, Three Sisters, The Seagull, The Cherry Orchard. They're morality plays, usually steeped in family intrigue and history. And they have been performed on stages all over the world. And they're considered in the sort of classic area of theater. And every country, I can't say that, a lot of countries had playwrights that represented their culture, the time and place in their history, and gave voice to that culture and time and place in history. Chekhov was definitely one of those in Russia. Strindberg was definitely one of those in Sweden. August Strindberg. Shakespeare was one of those in Great Britain. Our American plays started a little later, but they represent who we are our culture, and that's how important they were. Eugene O'Neill, Tennessee Williams, but those are mostly 20th century writers. We didn't have a lot of going on before that, and we're importing these into our country. In the 1800s, you could see these plays. 19th century, you could see these plays in New York City or other cities throughout the country. That's how important they were, and that's how important Chekhov is. But he wrote short stories. He wrote like 300 or 400 short stories. That's a lot, folks. And his short stories are very contemporary in the way they sound. Yes, it's definitely dated because they're not driving in cars or yakking on their cell phones, but they're riding around a horse and buggy and they're yakking to each other. So really that much hasn't changed because the human condition hasn't changed because our technology changes, but our humanity doesn't. And so he was writing about that. So I'm going to go into the canvas. You'll see it there, Chekhov. And there's an actual little brief documentary I'd like to watch about him. And then there's also a brief, there's a short story called The Bet. And it's an audio short story. But you can read along also, both. It's only 15 minutes long. Shouldn't take up too much of your time. Check it out. So you'll see that in Canvas. He lived from about 1860s, 65 there to about 1910 or so. He didn't quite see the Russian Revolution happen, but he was probably aware of political intrigue. The Russian Revolution happened in 1914 or somewhere about in there where the Tsar fought the new uprising of communism. And he lost, folks. In fact, he didn't just lose. Alexander, they took him and his family down to the basement, wife, kids, and they executed all of them. That's right, folks. That's how they used to get rid of their politicians, take them into the basement and execute them. So, but he was seeing some of that already. It just didn't happen in his lifetime. Yeah. So interesting character, and don't be put off by the dates of this story. The language is formal, the translation is pretty formal, and but it's very easy to follow, and you'll see that how universal it is. The language is. Now, this is a person who's writing in Russia before we had internet, before we had email, we don't know much about Russia in these days. It's like way over there somewhere, and it's always winter. We don't know much about Russia at all unless you've traveled there. And these days, and traveling wasn't that easy. And so it showed us out here into the Western world what life was like there. And what we discovered was much like our own. Just the language is different. Okay, so check those two documentaries out and read that short story along, or you can listen to it, read it at the same time. It's doing both, which I think is a good way to do it. Check it out. It's on, I posted on Canvas. So the other two people I want to talk about are women, because they're very, very important to our the 19th century literature. We're still producing their works today. They sell today, folks. We've made movies out of their books. Oh, yes. Maybe you've heard of Jane Austen. Maybe you've heard of Emma with Gwyneth Paltrow several times. Sense and Sensibility. Pride and Prejudice. She died early in the 1800s. She was only 41 years old. She lived an very interesting life and wrote 6 or 7 of the greatest novels in the history of novel writing. And they had a profound effect on the world that read this literature. We have used her literature to make movies. We filmed all of her books actually several times. I could tell you right now that Pride and Prejudice has been done, I don't know, half a dozen times. BBC, Masterpiece Theater, American movies, British movies. Emma, same thing. Sense of Sensibility, which is a wonderful film. And that, I gotta think of her name now. Anyway, it's a great film. She stars in it too. Why am I'm dropping the name right now? Thompson. What's her first name? Anyway, she actually wrote the screenplay, and she won an Academy Award for it. Has a few people you might know in it. I think the main one would be the British actor who's so popular. He's not so popular right now, but I'm drawing a blank. But you should check it out. It's a wonderful movie. And it's usually, these films, these books are usually about the class struggle. And it's usually about a woman's predicament in a very cloistered environment where they don't have a lot of options. What do you do if you're a woman in 1850, and how are you going to survive? What do you do? Well, you don't go to college and get your master's degree and become a teacher, because that was very rare. You didn't have a career as an architect or the town mayor, because you weren't going to get, there's no females doing that. So what do you do? And that's the dilemma of most of her novels. And usually what you do is you try to find a wealthy guy to live off. Yes, folks, they're trying to find a sugar daddy. It's a crude way of saying it. But so they're always trying to position themselves in society in order to meet the right guy. Now they've got to live with this guy and not just get his money. And but if they don't do it in a certain amount of time, the statute of limitations is over. By the time they were 25 to 30, they were considered old maids. Think about that, kids. They were too old to grab a rich guy. So you had to do it young. And so they're always positioning themselves in this society of parties and meeting the right people and introductions of right thing. And there was no bars to go to hang out. There's no dance floors to get drop your mollies on and go crazy to techno beats. None of that. You had to be invited to a formal party. You had to have a chaperone. It wasn't easy meeting men in those days, folks. Wasn't, or women for that matter. Men had a little easier, of course. They could go down to the local pub and pay a prostitute to be with them, but that's not who they're going to marry. They're not going to bring her home to mama, but they would bring one of these women from the Jane Austen novels because they're prim and proper, and they have social etiquette, and they're trained in the ways of high society, hopefully. And it doesn't always work out. And that's the beauty of these novels, because if it's all happy ending time, why read them? It has to be full of tragedy. People don't fall in love. They're not meant to be together. The one they want to be with isn't in the culture of their class system, so they can't be with them. Class system was really hugely important in Britain at this time. Sort of still is, not near what it used to be. We didn't have that much in the U.S. like that. We kind of got away from all that. That's why we moved here to begin with. But in those days, you definitely had to be a part of a social stratosphere, or you weren't going to get anywhere. She wrote about that in these books. And Emma, she is a matchmaker. She's like playing Cupid to other couples. But what about her? Is she going to find everlasting love? That's always the thing. So it is always about finding the right mate that's going to be able to support you in the way you feel you deserve. And so there's all these games being played in her novels. And if you watch the films, Anyway, Jane Austen, people are still reading her stuff. They're still reinventing it. They're still finding new nuances in her literature. And she wrote this stuff very early on, the 19th century. Like I said, she died rather young. I think she died at 41 years old, if I have that right. But she wrote six novels, important novels that got out into the world in her lifetime. So it's amazing. So that's the other one. The other one I want you to look at. Now I posted a documentary on her. Go check it out. It's on Canvas. You'll see it. The other one I want to talk about briefly is a person by the name of George Eliot. And I know what you're thinking. I thought you said I was just talking about women today, besides Chekhov. Well, folks, George Eliot is a woman by the name of Mary Ann Evans. But when she was writing during this time, women weren't getting published. Simple as that. There was so much sexism in publishing that it was really hard, if not impossible, to get published. And so she took the smart move and gave herself a male name, George Eliot. And she got published, folks, because people thought it was a man writing these books. She had lots of interesting people in her life, suicides, and many name changes, really lived an intriguing life. I posted a multiple-part documentary on her. I want you guys at least to watch part one. I posted that, but I think there's several more parts, I think 6, but they're all only about 10, 15 minutes apiece. Watch at least part one. You'll see a little bit of her history there. Watch more. Enjoy it. Get into it. Now, what George Eliot wrote were these books that when I was in high school, he used to sign us these books in high school and we dreaded it. We're going, oh, this is so boring. These old people dressed in these big dresses, wandering around these big mansions. It was dull. It was boring, but that's before you understand that reading is a discipline, and it takes a very disciplined reader to understand these books and to get into the flow and to get into the language and not to get uptight about the Victorian language. They're not dropping F-bombs everywhere like we do now, folks. They said other things that might not seem that risque, but it was. They're not saying all the crude things that we say in our literature now or our movies or our TV, whatever. They withheld that. They were civilized, cultured. That was very important. And so George Eliot, she wrote Silas Marner. It was an assignment I had to read in high school, and I just hated it. But later on, when I read it as an older grad student, I saw the beauty in it. The other one would be The Mill on the Floss. I know these names aren't just tripping off your tongue. You're going, Mill on the Floss? What the? You'll have to figure those out on your own. Remember, it's Victorian language, and they had a way of putting things. But it is about a mill. A mill. That's how exciting it is. And actually, it is very exciting. She did another one called Middlemarch. And these are legendary, brilliant novels brought to us by a woman writing in a man's name. And their fiction, we're still studying to this day. If you guys ever go to a four-year college or grad school and you study literature, you will study these stories. You'll have a whole entire semester of one of these writers if you're lucky, because you can't really cover them in a course like this. I can only give you a teaser of what could be, and if it piques your interest and you want to like take the chance of reading one of their stories, it will enrich your life beyond what you think you could imagine. If you have a great imagination, then you'll have no problem. But if you think you're bored by anything that's not completely contemporary, you're going to have to think again. Once you learn how to worm your way into the depths of this wonderful, wonderful literature. This is a little off topic, but I had a conversation with one of my students who recognizes me. Once in a while, people run into me out in the world. How they recognize me, I have no idea. Well, because you see me here, but I don't know them because I don't see you guys' wonderful faces. I can't put a name to the face. Sorry, this is how it is. So I was eating my lunch, and a student from one of my film classes, says Professor Rex. That's what they don't call me, Professor Thompson. That's okay. And we had a great conversation. He couldn't be more than 20 years old, and has actually had some pretty good taste in movies. And to him, an old movie would be 1995, ancient, really old movie. But he's looking at films because we're studying films, just like here, and we will study films here. The last 2 weeks of this class will be films. Right now, they're into the 1950s, and made him watch a Marlon Brando film, and he loved it. And he would never, he said, watch that on his own. First of all, it's an old world, 1955. Well, it is old. It's, 60 years ago. It's in black and white, yes. A lot of the young generation do not like black and white. Has to be splashy color, or it puts them to sleep, actually. When I show these films in my classes, his biases, he said it's wonderful, the story is wonderful. Marlon Brando stars in it, even Maurice Saint, the great Eliot Kazan directed it. You can't go any better than that, folks. Won all the Academy Awards that year for Best Writer, Best Picture, Best Actor for Brando. Universal story about the small guy going up against the corruption of big business. And it's universal, folks. But you might not dig the music or the photography because it's not our music or your music now. It's their music from back then. So you got to go into a time machine. You ever see Back to the Future? Get into the DeLorean, punch the number up to 1865, Russia, and go to a Anton Chekhov play. Get out of the DeLorean, go to the play, and see how it makes you feel to actually be there. Because that's what you kind of need to do. You got to take yourself out of our modern, confusing, pandemic, political times we're in, and put yourself into a George Eliot world or a Jane Austen world. And it's almost like fantasy because it seems so far removed. It's like you're reading Game of Thrones, except for there's no flying dragons, folks. Sorry to disappoint you. It's the society and culture of manners, and people the unspoken is very important. Think about that now. We speak about everything. Just look at the debates. They speak about everything, and they're not holding back. They used to hold back, folks. They used to think before they spoke, and these novels are full of people who were cautious in their language and cautious of saying something that might be hurtful or brutal. but their actions are betraying what they're saying. And that's the beautiful thing about all these story writers. It's not what they're saying, it's what they're doing that creates character. Because as you well know, people lie to you every day. People put on personas. They might say, have a happy day, everything's great. Well, when people ask me that, and they go, how you doing? I go, I'm okay. I never say I'm great because I can't lie. And everybody I say, how you doing? They go, hey, it's great. And I go, really? Great. I know you're lying. Well, they're trying to be polite, but still, if you're doing great, good for you. Anyway, check out these stories. Look at these documentaries. I'm not going to sign a paper this week because I'm so bogged down in correcting, grading. So you guys take a little break. But I hope you got the discussion going on why reading matters. Watch these documentaries. Read the Chekhov play. And I will see you next week. And remember, folks, humanity is connecting us throughout the ages, from Greek tragedies to modern contemporary hip hop music. We are all connected and we're all reaching out and we're trying to say, I am here. I matter.